There is a story told in the myths of old about beings who walk between two worlds, neither fully of the earth nor entirely of the heavens. If you have ever felt that peculiar weight of seeing too much, feeling too deeply, understanding the unspoken currents that move through rooms and relationships, then perhaps you already know what it means to carry the rarest of psychological patterns. The INFJ personality type, comprising less than 2% of the population, has long been described as empathetic, intuitive, idealistic, but these words barely scratch the surface of what it truly means to inhabit this particular architecture of consciousness. Carl Jung, who first mapped the terrain of psychological types, understood that certain configurations of mind exist not as quirks or preferences, but as fundamental orientations toward reality itself. And the INFJ represents something far more profound than a collection of traits. They are the counselors who never sought the title, the visionaries who see futures others cannot imagine, the healers who absorb the wounds of the world, until those wounds become indistinguishable from their own. To understand the INFJ is to understand a peculiar form of exile, a way of being that places you perpetually at the threshold, always observing, always translating, always mediating between what is and what could be. This is not merely about introversion or feeling, not simply about intuition or judgment, but about a fundamental way of encountering existence that places meaning above all else, that seeks patterns in chaos, that believes despite evidence to the contrary that human beings are capable of transformation. Picture someone who walks into a room and immediately senses the emotional temperature, who reads the subtext beneath every conversation, who carries an internal compass calibrated not to personal gain, but to authentic connection and moral purpose. These are the individuals who will remember what you said 6 months ago, because it revealed something essential about who you are, who will offer you precisely the insight you needed without your having asked, who will champion your potential, even when you have forgotten it yourself. They are driven by a vision of human possibility that borders on the prophetic, convinced that beneath the surface of ordinary life pulses something sacred, something worth protecting and nurturing into being. Yet this gift comes with a price that few outside this type can fully comprehend, for to see so clearly what others miss is to be perpetually aware of the gap between the real and the ideal, to feel the suffering of others as if it were your own blood spilling, to carry the burden of potential unfulfilled in every interaction and every abandoned dream. The INFJ does not simply observe injustice or pain, they metabolize it, they take it into their very cells, and this alchemical process of transforming the lead of human suffering into the gold of compassionate understanding defines their existence in ways both beautiful and devastating. What sets the INFJ apart begins with their relationship to knowledge itself. For they do not merely collect information, but seek the hidden architecture beneath surface appearances, the invisible threads that connect disparate phenomena into coherent wholes. Plato spoke of those who escape the cave and glimpse the sun, then return to describe a reality their fellow prisoners cannot see, and this captures something essential about the INFJ experience of consciousness. They possess what Jung called introverted intuition as their dominant function, a mode of perception that looks not outward at immediate sensory data, but inward, toward emerging patterns, symbolic meanings, archetypal forms. Where others see isolated facts, the INFJ perceives narratives, trajectories, the inevitable unfolding of causes into effects. This is not mysticism, but a form of pattern recognition, so sophisticated, it appears almost precognitive, allowing them to anticipate where relationships are heading, where organizations will stumble, where individuals will break or break through. They trust these intuitions even when they cannot articulate the reasoning, even when the evidence remains invisible to others, because they have learned through experience that this inner knowing proves reliable far more often than it fails. Combined with their auxiliary function of extroverted feeling, this intuitive depth becomes directed toward understanding and nurturing others, creating a personality structure uniquely equipped to perceive not just what people are, but what they could become. The INFJ sees you in your fullness, sees the version of yourself you have buried beneath compromise and fear, and they cannot help but orient themselves toward calling forth that hidden self. This is why they make extraordinary therapists, spiritual guides, teachers, writers who illuminate the human condition, because they possess both the vision to perceive potential and the emotional attunement to meet people where they are. Yet this combination also condemns them to a particular form of loneliness, for when you see through surfaces into depths, when you recognize the masks people wear and the pain they hide, casual interaction becomes almost unbearable in its superficiality. The INFJ craves authentic connection the way others crave air, needs to discuss ideas and meanings and the fundamental questions of existence, and finds that the world largely prefers to remain on the surface, to avoid the uncomfortable truths that lurk in psychological depths. They become skilled at code switching, at performing normalcy, at engaging in small talk while their actual thoughts move in entirely different dimensions. And this constant translation between their inner world and outer social reality exhausts them in ways that perplex those who mistake introversion for simple shyness. Their caring manifests not as indiscriminate kindness but as a fierce commitment to authenticity and growth, a willingness to hold space for others, darkness without flinching, to offer the truth even when it hurts, because they understand that real love sometimes requires difficult honesty. The INFJ is not the friend who tells you what you want to hear, but the one who reflects back what you need to understand, who sees your self-deceptions with crystalline clarity, yet approaches them with such gentleness that you can bear to look at them yourself. They possess an almost supernatural ability to read people, to detect incongruence between words and feelings, to sense when someone is performing rather than being. And this makes them both deeply trustworthy and occasionally unsettling to be around. People often confess things to INFJs they have told no one else, drawn by an inexplicable sense of safety, an intuition that this person will not judge but will understand, will hold their secrets with reverence. This happens so frequently that the INFJ becomes a reluctant repository for others' pain, a confessor without portfolio, and while they value being trusted, they can feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of emotional material they absorb. They give and give and give, pouring themselves into others, healing and growth, often neglecting their own needs, until they reach a point of complete depletion, what some call the INFJ door slam. That moment when the accumulated resentment and exhaustion finally overwhelms their patience, and they cut someone off entirely, completely, with a finality that shocks those who experienced only their warmth. This is not cruelty but self-preservation, the recognition that certain relationships drain more than they nourish, that some people will take endlessly without reciprocating, and the INFJ's values-driven nature eventually demands they protect their energy for connections that feel mutual and authentic. They will stand by friends through addiction, mental illness, life crises that would send others fleeing, but they cannot tolerate inauthenticity, manipulation, or exploitation. Betray their trust, violate their values, demonstrate that you see them merely as a resource to be used, rather than a person to be cherished, and they will vanish from your life, as if they were never there, taking with them all the insights and care they once offered so freely. The visionary dimension of the INFJ emerges from their orientation toward the future, their inability to remain satisfied with present circumstances, when they can perceive so clearly how things could be different, better, more aligned with human flourishing. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote of those who philosophize with a hammer, who question the foundations of received wisdom, and while the INFJ's approach is gentler, their commitment to truth-seeking is no less radical. They see through social conventions to the often arbitrary nature of rules and expectations, recognize that much of what passes for normal is simply what we have agreed to pretend is inevitable, and this awareness frees them to imagine alternatives that seem impossible to more conventionally minded individuals. They are natural reformers, drawn to causes that align with their vision of justice and human potential, willing to work patiently for years toward goals that may not be achieved in their lifetime, because they cannot help but serve something larger than immediate self-interest. This manifests in careers dedicated to healing, teaching, advocacy, creative expression that illuminates psychological and social truths, fields where their unique combination of insight and compassion can reshape understanding. They write books that change how people see themselves, create therapeutic approaches that honor complexity, lead organizations toward more humane practices, craft art that speaks to the existential questions others avoid. Yet their idealism also subjects them to profound disappointment when reality falls short of their vision, when people prove less capable of growth than the INFJ believed, when systems resist transformation, when cynicism and selfishness triumph over meaning and connection. They can fall into dark periods of disillusionment, questioning whether their efforts matter, whether anyone truly shares their values, whether they are naive to believe that human beings can transcend their current limitations. During these descents they often withdraw completely, retreating into themselves to process their grief over the world's suffering and their own powerlessness to heal it, emerging eventually with their idealism intact, but tempered by harder wisdom about human nature's contradictions. This cyclical movement between hopeful engagement and disillusioned withdrawal characterizes much of the INFJ's life journey, and learning to hold both their vision and their realism without sacrificing either becomes their primary developmental task. Their relationship to their own inner world resembles a vast cathedral, with endless corridors, chambers within chambers, depths that they themselves have not fully explored. And they require regular solitude not to escape others, but to process the overwhelming amount of input their sensitive system constantly absorbs. Jung spoke of the necessity of integrating the shadow, those aspects of self we reject or deny, and the INFJ's self-awareness means they engage in this work more consciously than most, examining their own motivations, biases, fears. With the same penetrating insight, they turn toward others. They know their capacity for judgment even as they cultivate compassion, recognize their tendency toward perfectionism even as they preach self-acceptance, understand that they sometimes use helping others as a way of avoiding their own needs. This reflexive awareness can become paralyzing if taken too far, creating an endless loop of self-examination that prevents actual living, but it also allows for genuine growth, for the integration of contradictions that makes them more whole. They are simultaneously the mystic and the analyst, the dreamer and the pragmatist, the hermit and the counselor, holding these opposites in creative tension, rather than resolving them into simpler categories. Their inner life has a quality of richness and complexity that they struggle to communicate, finding that words fail to capture the multi-layered nature of their perceptions, the way a single moment can contain multiple meanings simultaneously. This is why many INFJs are drawn to poetry, metaphor, symbolic expression, languages that can gesture toward what cannot be directly stated. They experience reality as inherently meaningful, as saturated with significance, and they seek constantly to decode and share these meanings with others, to create bridges of understanding across the isolating gaps between individual consciousness. When they find someone who speaks their language, who can meet them in those depths without becoming overwhelmed or dismissive, the relief and joy is immense, for these connections are rare enough to feel miraculous. They will invest enormous energy into such relationships, will share their inner cathedral's architecture, will offer the kind of understanding and acceptance they so rarely receive themselves, and in these moments the INFJ's gifts find their fullest expression. Yet for all their insight into others, INFJs often struggle to understand themselves with the same clarity, their inferior function of extroverted sensing creating blind spots around their own physical needs, practical realities, present moment awareness. They can become so absorbed in abstract thought and future possibility that they neglect to eat, to rest, to attend to their body's signals, until crisis forces recognition. They may ignore financial practicalities in service of their ideals, sacrificing security for meaningful work, or alternatively become trapped in practical concerns that violate their values because they failed to attend to material necessities earlier. This disconnect from the sensory world means they can feel somewhat disembodied, as if their consciousness floats slightly above the earthly plane, tethered, but not fully anchored. Developing their sensing function becomes crucial as they mature, learning to appreciate beauty, pleasure, the sensory richness of immediate experience, rather than always living in their heads or in possible futures. They may discover that working with their hands, gardening, cooking, engaging in physical practices that demand presence, helps balance their natural tendency toward abstraction. Some INFJs develop sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities, finding in art, music, nature, a way to unite their intuitive depths with sensory beauty, creating moments where inner and outer worlds align. Others struggle with this integration throughout their lives, remaining somewhat awkward in their physical form, never quite comfortable in social situations that demand performance rather than authentic presence. The world often feels too loud, too bright, too chaotic for their sensitive systems, and they must carefully manage their exposure to stimulation, learning their limits and respecting them rather than pushing through until they collapse. This self-care can look like selfishness to those who have come to expect the INFJ's endless availability, but it represents necessary wisdom, the recognition that they cannot pour from an empty cup, that their gifts require protection and replenishment. The INFJ's moral framework operates according to an internal compass calibrated through years of reflection and refinement, less concerned with conventional rules than with deeper principles of authenticity, integrity, compassion. They possess what the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called inwardness, a sense that true ethical life emerges not from external authority but from personal commitment to values that have been examined and chosen. This makes them simultaneously more flexible and more rigid than rule followers, willing to break conventions when those conventions violate deeper principles, unwilling to compromise on matters they see as fundamental to human dignity and meaning. They will go to great lengths to avoid harming others, will sacrifice their own comfort rather than act against their values, yet they can also make difficult decisions that prioritize long-term flourishing over short-term harmony. The INFJ who tells you a truth you need to hear but do not want to know, who ends a relationship that has become toxic, who challenges unjust systems despite personal cost, acts from this place of values-driven clarity. They do not mistake conflict avoidance for compassion, though their preference for harmony means they will exhaust all gentler approaches before taking harder stances. When they do take those stances, however, they become immovable, revealing the steel beneath their soft exterior, demonstrating that their kindness was never weakness but conscious choice. This moral seriousness can make them seem intense or heavy to more easygoing types, can create conflict with those who prefer to avoid existential questions, who want relationships to stay light and fun, rather than delving into meaning and purpose. The INFJ struggles to sustain interest in purely recreational interaction, needs their connections to serve some larger purpose of mutual growth and understanding, and this requirement can limit their social circle to a small number of deep relationships, rather than a large network of casual acquaintances. They are quality over quantity in all things, preferring one authentic conversation to a dozen superficial exchanges, one project that matters to 10 that merely occupy time. Their creative expression, when they develop it, carries a quality of psychological and spiritual depth that distinguishes it from more purely aesthetic or entertainment-focused work. The INFJ writer explores themes of identity, meaning, transformation, the interior journey toward wholeness. The INFJ artist creates pieces that invite contemplation, that gesture toward realities beyond the visible. The INFJ musician composes soundscapes that evoke emotional and archetypal dimensions. Whatever their medium, they use it to illuminate what they see with their intuitive perception, to make visible the invisible patterns and potentials they recognize. They often resist creating purely commercial work, feel corrupted by the necessity of compromising their vision for market appeal, yet also struggle with the practical challenges of sustaining creative life without income. This tension between artistic integrity and material survival plagues many INFJs who attempt to build careers around their gifts, forcing them to find innovative solutions or accept day jobs that fund their true work. Some become adept at navigating this balance, finding niches where their unique perspective meets genuine need, building audiences who value depth and authenticity over conventional entertainment. Others abandon the attempt, channeling their creativity into other outlets while earning livelihood through more practical means, accepting that not all gifts can be monetized without corruption. Regardless of career path, the INFJ needs some form of creative or meaningful expression to remain psychologically healthy, some way of externalizing the rich inner world that would otherwise become overwhelming in its intensity. Writing, art, music, counseling, teaching, any field that allows them to share their insights and facilitate others' growth serves this function, connecting their inner vision to outer impact in ways that make their existence feel worthwhile. The archetype of the wounded healer applies profoundly to the INFJ, for they typically arrive at their compassionate wisdom through their own encounters with suffering, their own journeys through darkness, their own struggles to integrate shadow and light. They understand pain not abstractly but intimately, have walked through their own descents, and emerged with hard-won knowledge about the nature of psychological transformation. This gives their empathy a quality of genuine understanding rather than sentimental pity, makes their guidance trustworthy, because it comes from lived experience rather than theory. The INFJ who helps you through depression has likely battled their own. The one who offers wisdom about difficult relationships has probably survived toxic ones. The one who speaks about finding meaning in suffering has done that alchemical work themselves. Their wounds become their credentials, their survival becomes their teaching, and they offer to others what they most needed during their own dark nights but often did not receive. This redemption of suffering through service to others, healing provides meaning that makes their own pain bearable, transforms it from senseless trauma into sacred initiation. Yet it also means they must continually do their own inner work, must tend their own wounds even as they help others tend theirs, must resist the temptation to lose themselves in others, healing while neglecting their own. The unconscious INFJ can become addicted to being needed, can structure their identity entirely around helping others, until they no longer know who they are apart from that role, can enable dysfunction under the guise of compassion, because it makes them feel valuable. Developing healthy boundaries, learning to help without losing themselves, recognizing when their assistance prevents others' growth rather than facilitating it. These lessons often come painfully to the INFJ, through experiences of burnout and betrayal. The mature INFJ understands that true help empowers others to help themselves, that sometimes the most compassionate response is to allow someone to face consequences, rather than rescuing them, that their own well-being must be safeguarded, if they are to sustainably offer anything to others. In relationships, the INFJ seeks a depth of connection that many find overwhelming, a union of minds and souls that transcends mere companionship towards something approaching spiritual communion. They do not date casually well, cannot sustain interest in relationships that lack intellectual chemistry and values alignment, need partners who can meet them in their complexity, rather than requiring them to simplify themselves for ease of understanding. The right partner experiences the INFJ's intuitive understanding as a profound gift, feels seen and known in ways they have never before experienced, benefits from the INFJ's commitment to their growth and potential. The wrong partner experiences the INFJ as intense, demanding, impossible to please, too concerned with meaning, and not relaxed enough to simply enjoy life's pleasures. The INFJ will eventually recognize misalignment and end relationships that do not serve mutual evolution, but they often remain too long in unhealthy dynamics, hoping their insight and care can transform the situation, believing they see potential in their partner that the partner does not see in themselves. Learning to distinguish between genuine potential and wishful thinking, between temporary difficulties and fundamental incompatibility, often takes the INFJ years and multiple painful experiences. They can fall into caretaking patterns, attracted to wounded partners they believe they can heal, only to discover that not everyone wants healing as much as they want someone to manage their dysfunction. The healthy INFJ relationship involves two whole individuals who choose connection rather than need it, who support each other's growth without losing themselves, who can engage in both profound conversation and comfortable silence, who respect each other's need for solitude without interpreting it as rejection. Such partnerships are rare, but transformative when found, creating the kind of safe harbor the INFJ requires, to rest from the exhausting work of navigating a world that so often misunderstands them. The world needs what the INFJ offers more than it typically recognizes or values. For in an age of fragmentation, superficiality, technological connection divorced from genuine intimacy, the INFJ's gifts of deep understanding, authentic presence, and commitment to meaning provide essential counterbalance. They are the ones who remember that efficiency is not the highest good, that not everything valuable can be measured, that human beings require beauty, purpose, connection to thrive rather than merely survive. They resist reduction of persons to functions, of relationships to transactions, of life to mere biological persistence, insisting through their very being that existence contains dimensions of significance that transcend material utility. In organizations, they are often the conscience, the ones who ask whether practices align with stated values, who advocate for humane policies, who see employees and clients as whole human beings, rather than resources or revenue sources. In communities, they create spaces for authentic sharing, facilitate healing conversations, champion the marginalized and overlooked, because their intuitive perception recognizes potential and dignity where others see only problems. In friendships, they offer the kind of loyalty and understanding that becomes life-saving during crises, showing up not just with casseroles, but with the willingness to sit in darkness, without rushing toward easy solutions. They are the friends who remember your dreams from years ago and ask if you are still pursuing them, who notice when you are performing versus being authentic, who love you not despite your flaws, but as a complete person whose flaws are part of your particular beauty. The INFJ's presence in your life, if you are fortunate enough to have earned their trust and affection, represents a rare gift. Someone who will see you fully, accept you completely, and gently challenge you to become the highest version of yourself. To be loved by an INFJ is to be believed in, even when you have stopped believing in yourself. To be forgiven your humanity, while still being held accountable for your choices. To be accompanied through your becoming, rather than pressured to arrive at some finished state. Yet the question remains whether the world can learn to value these qualities before it destroys what makes them possible. Whether cultures of speed and surface can make space for the slowness and depth the INFJ requires to function. Whether economic systems that reward exploitation can accommodate those who refuse to treat humans as instruments. The INFJ often feels like an evolutionary misfit, a consciousness adapted for a world that does not yet exist or perhaps once existed but has been lost, and this fundamental misalignment between their nature and the environment they inhabit creates ongoing existential tension. They look around at social media's performance of connection rather than actual intimacy, at careers that demand soul-deadening compromise, at political systems that prioritize power over justice, at environmental destruction for short-term profit, and they feel the wrongness of it viscerally, cannot understand how others accept these conditions as inevitable. Their vision of how things could be different haunts them. The gap between actual and possible becomes a wound they carry, and they must find ways to act toward transformation while accepting that the change they envision may not arrive in their lifetime. This requires a particular kind of courage, the willingness to plant trees whose shade they will never enjoy, to work toward futures they will not inhabit, to maintain hope, without evidence that hope is justified. The alternative is despair, cynicism, the death of the vision that makes them who they are, and while INFJs sometimes fall into these dark places, they typically cannot remain there. Their fundamental nature, oriented toward possibility and meaning, eventually reasserts itself. They are the ones who keep insisting that another world is possible, even when all evidence suggests otherwise, who continue creating pockets of authenticity and depth in hostile terrain, who refuse to accept that efficiency and profit represent the highest human values. In this way they serve a prophetic function in culture, keeping alive visions of human potential that pragmatists dismiss as naive, but that provide essential orientation toward what we could become if we chose differently. The care the INFJ offers is not sentimental but rigorous, demanding as much from themselves as from others, rooted in the conviction that human beings deserve to live examined lives of purpose and connection, rather than sleepwalking through existence. They care enough to tell difficult truths, to hold others accountable while remaining compassionate, to believe in potential even when current behavior suggests otherwise. This caring manifests in attention, in remembering details that reveal who someone truly is beneath their social presentation, in showing up consistently over years, rather than offering dramatic gestures that fade quickly. The INFJ will be the friend who texts on the anniversary of your mother's death years later, who remembers your obscure interest and sends relevant articles, who notices when you are struggling even when you have not said anything because they read the subtle shifts in your energy and expression. They offer the gift of being truly seen, of being known not just in your strengths but in your wholeness, including your struggles and contradictions. And they offer this without judgment while maintaining clear boundaries about what they will tolerate. Their vision extends beyond individual healing toward collective transformation, seeing each person's growth as contributing to the larger evolution of consciousness. Understanding that personal work and social change are inseparable, they cannot save everyone, cannot heal all the world's wounds, but they persist in doing what they can, where they are, with what they have, trusting that small actions toward greater consciousness ripple outward in ways that cannot always be traced but that matter nonetheless. The INFJ at their best embodies what Rainer Maria Rilke called ripening, the slow, patient work of becoming more whole, more authentic, more aligned with what matters most, and they invite others into this same lifelong process of growth toward greater humanity.